Qiana, would you tell me a bit about yourself, your background?
Yeah, so my background is actually started out as a teacher. I like to tell people that I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was entering my senior year of college, undergrad, and I had a professor who told me, you should go into education or have real world experience. And that real world experience ended up being a stint, or I would say my first career as an educator. I spent 7 years in the public education system here in Los Angeles. And then after 7 years, I knew that I loved teaching, but I didn't know if I was better at something else. And my generation is a generation that certainly started people off on multiple careers. So I went from being a teacher to a dean of a very large middle school, and then to the world of tech. And I started out as a trainer and then moved into project management. And that has sort of, landed me in a lot of different sort of areas within tech, and primarily in the ed tech space for the first 10 years or so, serving several roles, and then serving as a consultant between government agencies and startups and enterprise solutions. And now I'm working for an innovative transportation company by the name of HopSkipDrive. We essentially are the rideshare for kids.
Absolutely. And I'm very curious about your thoughts on the rideshare space. Do you think that they're doing enough to address the populations that best need rideshare?
It's a really great question. It's why I love my job so much, is because I get to focus on specifically the most vulnerable population. So I can speak for HopSkipDrive in the sense that we are serving not just children, but we have the capacity to serve children with special needs. So children who have special education requirements for transportation. We are transporting children who are experiencing homelessness. We transport students who are within the foster care system. So we are not just serving on the B2B side, on the consumer side, parents who can afford to download an app, or even parents who can download an app and actually have a credit card that they can attach to it. But we're also servicing these families and communities that have rights to transportation. And so organizations and school districts can utilize our services to provide transportation. That's what I spend the bulk of my time crisscrossing across the country, talking about those most vulnerable kids. And we can also, we've done some pilots on supporting developmentally disabled people as well, and senior citizens. My view on rideshare and mobility is that transportation and mobility should never be a barrier for people to obtain opportunity or to reach opportunity, whether that's jobs, whether that's going to the school of your choice, whether that is getting to school, period, whether that's being picked up in a timely manner after dialysis treatment. I believe that public transportation, as we see it, and mobility sort of solutions, innovation, rideshare certainly can support a lot of people. It does not, however, support everybody, right? And that's the issue with scale, right? So when you're trying to scale, you're a business, you're trying to go after a group, an addressable market that's large enough for you to be able to churn it out and do it repeatedly. And I think that there's nuances with seniors, with people who have developmental disabilities, with children that don't fit oftentimes within a highly, I would rigid to some degree in terms of how rideshare and others are onboarding drivers and how they're doing it. So I think that we have a long ways to go when it comes to whether or not rideshare is for all.
Have there been many changes as the rideshare companies are going public?
I think that, obviously rideshare is, there's a lot of scrutiny around it, whether it's, how those drivers are employed, how do we categorize those drivers, whether they are 1099, whether they're independent contractors or they are W-2. There is definitely more pressure, I think, from the public. We're more vocal about what we expect and what we should be demanding of these service providers. That's what we are, service providers, right? In terms of, do we fingerprint drivers? Do we not? I'm proud to say that HopSkipDrive since day one has always fingerprinted our drivers. The drivers have to meet a high level of standards and experience in order to be care drivers on our platform. That's something that's unique about what we're specifically doing. I think that, going public, obviously, you just have a lot more writing from the public, sector in terms of, people, betting and investing in a company that they want to see win and succeed. And I think that, this idea of winning does force you to critically, or it should force you critically think about what you can be doing that improves your service, and it certainly invites way more scrutiny than you might have if you had remained private. So I think that there are definitely just challenges in particular that some of the biggest players in this space we're going to see regardless if they gone public. Now I think there's just greater pressure for them to succeed and for them to provide shareholder value. That will become tougher. Certainly as there becomes a light that's shined on them to a much higher degree, and a great deal of scrutiny that will be heading their way. And we can see that with a lot of legislation that is passing, from Los Angeles, AB5 to Seattle, minimum wage, New York. There's a lot of different things that are happening in that space, and I'm not so sure how much we'll be able to stop that, or whether or not we even should, right? So I think that there's an ethical question that people in this industry must ask themselves as well.
Great. Generally speaking, how has the investor community been reacting to your startup?
The company has done really, really well, and the investor community is thinking about, I think we think about mobility and we think about transportation. I think, for a lot of people, they didn't necessarily think about children. They didn't think about some of the other subgroups of people, whether it's seniors. It's just, I think the investor community wasn't, for large in part, investor community aren't people who typically ride public transportation. Let's just be honest truth. The investor community aren't people who may not have challenges with getting their children from place to place because they might be able to employ a nanny or someone who can drive their children around. But now that we are here and we exist and we're growing and we're expanding, it does make people think about, hey, what are we doing? What opportunities could be missing out by looking at mobility for this specialized group? So we've seen a lot of positive. We've seen a lot of positive chatter and other attention because of the work that we're doing and because we're expanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shifting gears to keep talking a bit about the investment industry. You yourself are an impact investor. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the kind of typical VC community might be missing out on big investments because of this myopic point of view? They might be missing certain experiences that might be very big problems, very big markets, and they just don't see them because of their experience?
I mean, the easy answer is yes, 100%, absolutely. I'll give you an example. Women spend, in the billions of dollars annually, consumer on hair care products. When you dive into the who, and then you break down, who and the personas and things like that, what overwhelmingly we saw is that, in particular, African American women, people like me who have curly hair, spend disproportionately more money on hair care products, 8 times as much. So that's a huge market opportunity, right? If you just look at hair care products and anything that related to the hair care industry, you might go, oh, the big boys, Johnson & Johnson and anyone else who's in that space has gotten it. There's no innovation to be happening. And so obviously that is a wrong assessment. And the reason why African-American women spend so much money, 8 times as much for hair care products, isn't because we just love spending that much money on our hair. Is because we were constantly trying to find products that work specifically for our hair texture, and we weren't finding it. So we would often buy a new product, it wouldn't work, try another product 2 months later, try another product. So yes, we are buying more simply because none of the products are working. Now, if you knew that, you go, well, why not just make products that are specific to different hair textures, different curl patterns, et cetera. And guess what? If you were a person who could, and we know that consumer packaged goods is a pretty expensive endeavor to start up, but what that gave way to was a lot of women, primarily women of color, were just making their own products at home, right? And then they started selling it to their friends, and then they started creating like little microsites to sell it to other people, and then that garnered attention because there were a few investors who looked like me who said, I experienced it myself. I know that this is a market that I should be investing in. And now what we see is some of the biggest companies in that space acquired some of those small businesses, right? And then just blew it out of the water. So I think that's a prime example of, of like what's missing when you don't have a diverse slate of people who are looking at deals, who can look from a point of view that isn't typical or known, so I think that we're missing out on a lot of different things when we're not able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. If you have never had an issue with getting to school every day, or you have never experienced homelessness, then you don't know how difficult transportation is, right? I would love to buy a Tesla. I would love to stop pumping gas, but there isn't a electric charging station within 5 miles of my neighborhood. If I live somewhere else, that would likely be, that would not be the norm. And so we have to consider things like that prevent certain people from being able to do things, and how we think about everyone's going to go electric. Well, everyone can't go electric, because if you live in places that are densely populated in apartment buildings, where exactly are all the electric stations going to go for charging? So that it's just something that we have to consider and be thinking about. And I don't like to be a Debbie Downer, but when I'm at tables and amongst other investors and things like that, I do like to say, here's what you're missing by that statement, right? And it's sometimes quite eye-opening for a lot of people to hear that.
I was chuckling to myself because this is actually the second conversation I've had this week about the size of the market of Black women hair care products.
Yeah.
So I might offline connect you with my colleague. He was suggesting like a blockchain version of Twitter or expert advice on hair care products for the community. So maybe
I would love that from a personal standpoint, because I think probably in the last 2 months, there have been like 3 or 4 new products on the market that I've tried. So I've actually went out and bought 3 or 4 new products and tried them, and most of them didn't work. Or I didn't like how they made my hair feel. So, I'm always interested in figuring out what would be the best product. And I will have to say, I think the best thing that has happened for Black women, especially when it comes to, hold on, sorry, when it has come to hair care products, it has been YouTube and Instagram. For the reality of people that look like me, or who have what I think looks like my texture of hair, to be able to see them try new products. So then I don't have to sometimes do the trial and error myself, because they're actually they're actually trying it and telling us how it made their hair feel, what it was like. And so that has been really helpful, I think, to a lot of us in the curly hair community about, the products that we're trying on our hair.
I wouldn't have much to add to the subject, but my hair does get curly if it gets long, so I just compensate by cutting it short. But
Yeah, I could just shave it all off. Yeah, for sure. And then I wouldn't be spending money on hair care products.
there you go.
Yeah.
So if you were made dictator of Silicon Valley, are there structural changes that you would put into place to, maybe bring things into the right direction?
Garrett, that is a totally unfair question. Well, I think that the first thing is that I probably wouldn't want it to be a dictatorship. I would probably really want it to be a democracy. That is number one. I think that I don't have the right answers, and I think that all the right answers, and I think that my point of view is based on my lived experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my lived experience is valid, right? My experiences are real. How I feel about my experiences are real. And I think that if we took note of facts, so Silicon Valley loves data, right? They also love to omit certain types of data, right? On the way coming into work today, I noted that there is getting ready to be a district attorney race. In 3 months, we'll be electing a new district attorney in Los Angeles, and one of the candidates actually has what they consider to be a very out there kind of stance. And one of his stances is that he would like to, when judges and DAs are thinking about filing criminal charges against someone, they want to remove race, they want to remove address and zip code and name, so that they can make those determinations without those things that often we know cause bias, right? So if you were to remove those things, what would happen? And I think that if we were to remove, and we think about creating a more equitable place within Silicon Valley, how do we go about doing that? And I would certainly say that it shouldn't matter if I attended Stanford or I attended Cal State San Francisco, right? It should not matter if I learned to code at 45 or I learned to code at 15. None of those things should matter as long as I can effectively do my job well. And we've created systems and cultures and communities and companies that enable people to grow. And I think that those are some of the things that I would, hope to get others to agree with. I think that we understand that we're moving into an area where we like to say that we don't have enough engineers. We like to say that we don't have enough people to do X jobs. We have X number of jobs open, right, at any given time. Well, in Silicon Valley, they're oftentimes just fighting over the same exact people, right? They're looking at a pool of people that have a very, very similar background, and then we're just shuffling the cards, right? This person spent X number of time at this X company, and then they moved over to this company, and they're just moving from company to company. Well, if that's the pool that you're working with, absolutely 100% you have a shortage. Yeah, that you're not actually increasing the pie. And so what I would like to do, and I think that which only makes sense across our country, across the world, is to figure out how do you not just say, I want a bigger piece of the pie, but I want to increase the pie size, right? So my slice increases, but the overall size of the pie has increased as well. And so I think that we should be looking at other people who have backgrounds and a skill set that might not have gone to Stanford, that might not have gone to Caltech, that might not live in this zip code. And how do we do that, right? And how we do that is by ensuring that those people can come in the funnel and that those people actually get hired. And I think that is super important. And once we have those people at all levels, I don't know if you saw it, Intel just released some really interesting data. It should be really embarrassing for their company. They didn't have to release that information. I think they just released it yesterday. But by and large, it says that, 29% of, I think it's something like 29% of white males in that company make more than $200,000. So when you do everybody else, everybody is less than like 2%, right? Women and people of color and things like that. So, so white males and Asian males, and the caveat to Asian males is I think that there's an issue with just saying Asian, because there's Vietnamese, there's Cambodian, there's Korean, there's Japanese, there's Chinese. So what do we mean by Asian? So, but I'll table that conversation because I think that's unfair. But if we look at that, like, we have to honestly say that we have not increased the pie. We're just shuffling the deck. And then how do we have more innovation? How do we have more people coming into our companies that have different lived experiences from everybody else, and then are able to then really create the innovation and really, see systematic change and some significant impact in our society that I think that we would all benefit from.
Right. During my time in Silicon Valley, I noticed there was this pernicious attitude of A's hire A's. And if you hire someone who doesn't have the perfect pedigree, then somehow they're going to bring in worse people, and all of a sudden your company is just going to rot. And what I invariably noticed is any company that had this attitude, within 6 months, they'd be out of business. Now, maybe it's just a odd sample, but it's also a very big passion of mine to be able to get great people into great jobs. And sometimes it might not always be the person that went to Stanford that happens to be or popular this morning. Might always be the person with the best pedigree that's going to be doing the best job. But I think there needs to be some education done to companies to convince them of this, to teach them that you might be able to not hire the person who is on paper has the kind of sterling resume, because oftentimes they are not loyal to the company. They are going to be hopping around jobs within 6 months to a year because they know that they can jump to Intel or jump to Facebook, Google, and get a big raise when they do.
Yeah.
So what can we do to better convince companies of this?
If I had that answer, I think I would be you, or I would be someone else. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. Asking all the hard questions.
I don't know. The answer is that I don't honestly have the answer. I just know that we're missing out on so much. And I come across and meet so many people, whether they be startups, young people, other people who didn't obtain social capital, didn't sort of win social capital at birth, right? And it's a struggle to get that social capital and that social proof. And I think we don't talk enough about what social capital is and how that then becomes a snowball effect into your success. And we can see that lived out in Silicon Valley and in other places where people, can fail royally, right? But because they have that social proof, either they went to Stanford or they had a startup, and even if it crashed and burned, people still respect them, right? Because they have that social capital. They were in those circles. And I recognize that even someone like myself, I did not have social capital. I didn't know what that was. I was a first generation college student. I thought that going to college meant just working really hard, going to school, getting, decent grades, good grades. And unfortunately or fortunately for me, I also had to work full time and part time as I was going to college. I didn't understand that there was a whole nother world that would have opened up for me had I had gained entrance, or had I even known that it even actually existed. And so I think that one thing that I always like to talk about is how important social capital is, how we should be teaching social capital to people as well. How do we make ways for people who look like me and others who weren't born with social capital to understand how powerful it can be and what they can do, and how do we fit that within their lived experience of going to college and oftentimes working part-time, or going to school part-time and working full-time. What does that look like when you can't network, right? What does that look like when you can't get a ticket to the, to an amazing conference that you could meet a lot of different people because the ticket is cost prohibitive, or it conflicts with your schedule, or you can't get a babysitter for your children, all those kinds of things. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we have to look at leveling the playing field, that, for all intent purposes is really difficult. It's not as easy as creating an algorithm for it. And when people say, well, then are you against tech? And my answer is no, I'm not against tech. What I recognize is that algorithms and building out systems can't solve for some of our biggest challenges just alone by themselves, right? And I think if we want to solve this problem of getting more people in, we're going to have to utilize it's going to be multidisciplinary. Right? We're going to have to take a little bit of computer science. We're going to take a little bit of history. We're going to take a little bit of sociology. We're going to take a bunch of that stuff. We have to have all those people at the table, economists and other people, to help us build out systems that do encompass some technology, but building systems requires so many different disciplines. I think it's going to be necessary. And I think for a long time, we've ignored that.
Right. With New Year's coming up, if there was someone that you would be giving advice to about New Year's resolutions, about systems they could implement in their life to help them in 5, 10, 20 years knock down some of these barriers or best position themselves, if there are systems or habits or thoughts or just basic advice that you could give to people?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the things that I've been really thinking a lot about and being really open and honest about is that when you grow up poor and you grow up when you grow up poor, when you grow up with less advantages, there becomes this idea where I just want to survive. So as a child, when I was growing up, I just didn't want to be poor. Well, I just knew that I didn't want to be poor. I knew that I didn't want to struggle, right? So that was my goal, right? My goal and my dreams were not to struggle, or not to be poor, or not to be hungry. In college, there were times where I went to the food bank to get food. And so those are the things that motivate me, was just not to be poor. How to do it and what that meant was murky. That it was just that. And so what I want to do, what I've started to do in my life, and I think it's super important, is to essentially spread this word around writing your dreams and your goals down. And if you find yourself having a hard time writing dreams or your ideas, because sometimes it's hard to write a goal because you don't know how it could be scary, right? So to just write your dreams down, write your thoughts and your ideas down, and put it up where it can be seen every day. Don't hide it. So if you do a vision board, if you have a list or any of those kinds of things, put it in a place that it will be seen every single day by you, whether it's on your bathroom mirror, whether it's in your living room, whether it's on your desk at work, wherever it is. Put it somewhere where it'll be seen every day. Or maybe we should be developing an app that reminds you every day via text or something. Someone can take that idea, but do that, and then chip away at figuring out anyone who's attached to that in some capacity. Reach out, ask a question on Twitter or something else. And so I think that is, for me, as I look at towards 2020, I'm reevaluating, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? What are my dreams? What are my hopes? What are my desires? My desires have gotten bigger, and my dreams have gotten bigger than just being poor. And I'm not considered poor. But I'm certainly not rich. And so I want to ensure that children like me and a lot of other young people and people all over, that our dreams matter. That sometimes it's really hard to dream when you're hungry, right? And so it's hard to tease that out. It's really hard to dream about what you want better for your life in 2020 when you're struggling to pay your bills right now. And I understand that. And so what I think that is super important is to write those dreams down, to if they're small things, then just write small things down, and that's okay. And then when you accomplish that, or you've done that, to cross it off so that you can feel a sense of accomplishment, announce it to the world, share it with the world, get other people to share it as well, because it is an accomplishment. And the only other thing that I would say is, challenge ourselves to step out of our comfort zone at least one time, whether it's once a month or once a quarter, at some point, step out. I'm an introvert to the most part, so sometimes I find it really hard to, and so sounds crazy because by nature of my work, I have to talk and be around lots of people all the time. So it can be a challenge for me, but sometimes some of the most serendipitous things have happened when I've stepped out of my comfort zone, and I continue to do that. So I'm looking forward to 2020 for sure.
Oh, that's great. That's great. The power of writing down, as you were mentioning, there's a lot of research around both writing it down as well as kind of speaking it out loud on a routine basis. The power of affirmations. There's some surprising studies behind the ability to basically will yourself to make things happen when you focus on them. So I think that's fantastic advice. I know that we have a hard stop, and that's unfortunate because I wish I could talk for another several hours, but is there anything, any other parting thoughts or comments you'd like to get in the last couple minutes here?
I think that like what you're doing, the work that you're doing, your team is doing is great and it's amazing. And I just want to figure out ways to, make sure that people have pathways to their dreams, right? And I think that we have to recognize that there are barriers to people getting to opportunity. I always like to say, whenever possible, that genius is equally spread across zip codes. Opportunity is not. It is our job when we're in positions of power to remove those barriers. And every day we should be working towards that.
It's a very great quote to end on. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Garrett.